And hi, everybody. Welcome to class. It's Monday, February 18th, and we are in week 6. So tonight, the topic is selling wine in retail stores, restaurants, tasting rooms, events, and wine clubs. And getting an understanding, from the vineyard through the production, uh, uh, into the distribution, getting to the what's considered the final point of sale. And point of sale is where the actual transaction takes place with the customer. And so in the sort of the lingo of the wine business, you might hear somebody talking about different marketing materials that they're creating, and it's called POS materials. And that means point of sale materials, particularly for stores or for restaurants. And these would be signage, these would be displays, and those kind of things. So point of sale is where that critical transaction takes place to actually get the wine sold and so forth. So where we are then in a review of the supply chain is we've got the winery or the custom crush client, and then just a real quick review is the 3-tier system, which is from a licensed winery to a licensed wholesaler distributor to the point of purchase or point of sale, which would be a restaurant or a retail store. And in restaurant, this is any on-premise licensee, so it could be a restaurant, a hotel, a wine bar, a bar, and those kind of things. And then, of course, the retail store being the bricks and mortar end of how wine used to always be sold by going into a store. The direct to account is the wineries taking on, assuming the responsibility of the distributor, and this is limited to in-state transactions. So the winery actually has to apply for and hold a distribution license. But really critical in understanding this is the logistics and the expenses of doing business make this very challenging for the most part. That being said, a lot of small wineries have the option, especially locally, to supply to local restaurants and hotels and so forth. You can do it all around, up and down a state, but then you start to get into, you have to make sales calls, you've got to service the accounts, you've got to take the orders, you've got to prepare the shipments, and then you've actually got to, and this is usually the biggest stumbling block, you've got to get the goods to the account, to the licensee. So either the restaurant or retail store. And so direct to account offers a number of challenges, but if you can figure out the logistics and figure out an inexpensive shipping or transportation means to get it to the account, it can be quite lucrative, okay? Again, I like to say you're not cutting out the middleman, you're becoming the middleman, all right? So that's that. And then we've got the direct to account, direct to consumer in your tasting room, in your wine club, at your winery website. And then finally, the sort of the outlier, which is you're selling wines through a third-party website that may or may not actually purchase your goods and put them in inventory. They may just simply facilitate the transaction that comes to you, and then you've got to process it and ship it and so forth. So that's, again, technically not the direct-to-consumer, because there's a third party and they're getting some percentage of sales or of the transaction amount. So they're in the loop, okay? All right, so There's a WineBizSim for tasting rooms, and we'll review that actually next week. And we're going to kind of get into the, well, actually, we'll review that tonight. And some of the key things to remember is it's great to have a small winery, and you know you've got your tasting room, you've got a wine club or a mailing list, but so many of the wineries find and don't prepare for the need to actually find other ways to make money. So it can be really challenging to just have the wine sales be your only source of revenue. And this is, you know, one of the key revenue drivers, obviously, of a winery. But then if you have a tasting room, you've got revenue from tasting fees, and you might have several different types of tastings. Certainly any tasting room you go into, they're selling glassware, jams and jellies, olive oil, corkscrews, t-shirts, and all sorts of merchandise. And then by having special events, which might be different wine and food events or VIP kind of tastings that are separate from what you would normally have in the tasting room. Could be musical events; those are very popular, and it could be simply that you've got an area and you've got a bluegrass band playing on Saturday, and that helps to increase the draw and attraction. And then the other thing is determining kind of what your target is for these kind of events, so that it matches the demographics you would hope for your customers, so that you can sell product and tickets and so forth for the events. And then the other thing is selling food. Again, it could be part of the merchandise if it's packaged goods that are simply purchased and taken away, and whatever, it kind of falls under merchandise. If it's perishable food, you might have a deli. You might even have certain food items to take away out for a picnic on the grounds, all the way up to having a full-blown restaurant on your property. And so these are the key things that a lot of wineries are looking at to embellish the sale of the wines. And there are untold number of wineries who find that in reality, the best they can do is about break even with the wine. And so the tasting fees, the merchandise, events, and food actually become their profit items. So it's really great when you're going to the wine country. Take a look around and see what the different wineries are doing, and when you're going in, see if you can start to pay a little bit more attention to the kind of things that they're doing. So then there's measures of success. The age-old adage is if you want to make $1 million in the wine industry, you've got to start with $5 million, and you'll end up with $1 million. You'll lose $4 million. So measuring success in the metrics is probably best demonstrated actually in the WineBizSim. Let me get to that real quickly. Sorry that I didn't have this queued up. Let me sign in. All right. So for anybody who's interested for business purposes or learning, and this is something that could be really good for anybody in the MW program as well, because these are the kind of things that there might be questions about pertaining to how, paper for in marketing and so forth. If you're starting a winery, where are you going to put your money and where are you going to put your focus? And a lot of people doesn't even occur to them to say, well, you know, we're going to have our wine business, and this is how we're going to, you know, look at investment and production and you know, vineyards and coming up with the product. But additionally, a smart winery today will often have other revenue sources that they can leverage. And if you've got a line of jellies or olive oils, t-shirts, and whatever, you can also sell them to the wine club members. You can sell them on your website. So it's not just in the tasting room. And it's something we're gonna get to a little bit later, because there's not only the proliferation of wineries, but the way wine clubs are being formed by companies that aren't wineries. And then they're also very often offering, you know, the logo hats and t-shirts and corkscrews and glassware and all that kind of stuff. All right, so when we go in here, we're going to go to the tasting room profitability calculator and take a look at how wineries, or how tasting rooms measure success and the kind of the metrics that are involved there. So as is typical, we've got a workbook and you put in the winery name and your name. You can do a case study if you're thinking about starting your own tasting room, or you can just go in and play around with this. But it's highly recommended that you kind of take a look at what these key drivers are and so forth. So the basic numbers for measuring success are ultimately going to be your profit and loss over here. But some of the key things: how many days a year are you open? And consider location of a tasting room. And this actually, you can use this for a wine store pro forma also. So either a tasting room or a retail store, how many days are you open? What's your estimate of visitors? How many people are going to come to the store or the tasting room? And how many are actually going to make a purchase? And so the differential between these are, it seems like something relatively simple, but if you're operating a tasting room, you get people in and out of the door, and part of the family's playing on the lawn, and you've got a group and everybody's kind of wandering around. These numbers can actually be pretty challenging to come up with accurately. And what you're looking for is over here, of the people that come and just sort of look around and see what you've got, how many of them actually make a purchase? All right, and that's so what's the percentage of visitors that you convert to a customer? And this applies for retail as well. I was in retail for 6 years, and you just get people who just sort of wander in looking around, and they might be price shopping you or just seeing what your selection is. And it's really key, how effective are you at enticing them to actually make a purchase rather than just kind of kicking the tires, okay? Then you've got your revenue drivers, and these are basic numbers of what's your average number of bottles sold per customer that you have. And if you have a good point of sale, you know, your cash register or point of sale system, you should be able to, every day, every week, every month, and every year, capture how many actual bottles were sold at what average price. And that's what would go into this field, okay? So this would be the number of bottles, and this would be the price per bottle. And so what you're looking at in running this, you've got to be competitive. You've got to be within range. But what if you could sell another 0.1 bottle to every customer, and you could see the profit and loss start to go up pretty significantly by small increments in number of bottles per customer. And then, of course, the average price that you're selling your wines for, $40, is pretty high, unless you're in Napa or a really premium area. But you can see then as you lower the price per bottle also, that has a dramatic effect. So that's your bottle sales, all right? Then you've got merchandise, what's your average sale per person, and do you have any perishable foods? You might want to separate that out. And then if there's any other miscellaneous things that you're selling, that would come under here. Tasting fees, I'm old enough to know that it was considered quite radical to charge for tastings, and now it's common practice. And the ability to charge for tastings has had a number of very positive effects. Probably the biggest one that was a little bit unanticipated. When you're operating a winery tasting room, you attract people who are just coming to drink the wine for free. You can call them whatever you want. One of the terms that's used in the industry is the freeloaders. And they'll just park themselves at your tasting bar, drink excessively frequently, so you've got to deal with all that kind of a mess. And then they're until you kind of kick them out, or they get tired and they decide to move on. So by charging a tasting fee, it turned out you were kind of eliminating the freeloaders. And even if they are tasting, you get whatever revenue you're deriving. So the key numbers are what's your cost per person, and then of the tasting flight, how many customers, again, that critical number, are actually going to purchase a flight. And then also one of the things that very often a winery will waive the cost of the tasting if the customer makes a purchase or joins the wine club. So you can actually account for that. Let's say that you want to have X number or 10% of all the people who do tastings are going to make a purchase, or you're going to waive their tasting fee, or they're already a wine club member, or whatever it is. Okay, so those are the key there. And very often you might have a couple of different tastings available. So here's our basic tasting, and you get 2 or 4 or however many wines. We have the reserve tasting, which then would be tier 2, more expensive, fewer people, and then maybe even a third tier, which is a sit down. Remember, we were looking at the best practices, and there was a study done that looked at the average purchase ratio by a seated tasting, just standing up at the tasting bar, or having a guided tasting with an expert, or maybe some special wine and food pairing experience or whatever. So this allows you to set up 3 potential variations on your tastings. Then events, it boils down to how many events are you having, what's the average number of attendees, what's your average ticket sales. And then you can also set up your point of sale system so that you can separate event wine sales from the wine sales day to day, and that's also, those are good numbers to be able to break out. And then, you know, what's the average selling price, and do you have any additional sales? You might even, you know, there are people that actually invite food trucks to come to the property. They've got music for the day. There are all sorts of things like farmers markets that wineries put on, and they'll get artisans with cheeses and chocolates and even produce and whatever to come in, again, to bolster the traffic to get people to the point of purchase. Okay, so that wraps up into the total revenue for all of your activities. And then, of course, we've got expenses, and what's the average cost of wine versus the selling price. So you put that in there, and then how many ounces of wine at what average bottle cost for the various tiers, so that you can also see that you're profitably running the various tiers of your tastings. Same with wines for events. Cost of goods that are non-wine, and this really should drive home. Again, selling in a tasting room is not all just free profit. You've become the retailer. So you've got your cost of goods for the non-wine merchandise. You've also got to provide, you know, bags and carrying cases and tissues and wrap and stuff. If you put out crackers or peanuts or popcorn or offer a little cheese bites, what are your food items that you provide in the tasting room? And then what's your annual cost of glassware and decanters and dump buckets? There's breakage, there's pilferage. People steal the damnedest things out of tasting rooms, and so forth. All right, so these are your cost of non-wine goods. And then you get into, this is where it drives home. You're running a retail operation. What do you have as an allocated expense out of the whole property in mortgage and whatever? Or do you maybe have your tasting room on a separate property, or maybe even renting? And the renter mortgages, especially if you go down to downtown Napa and see all the remote tasting rooms, you know, they're in storefronts and things like that. Water, electricity, gas, phones, internet, marketing budgets. We had talked about, if you have a tasting room, if you have a retail store, if you have a restaurant, you have to advertise, you have to market that part of the business. And so what are you doing for advertising? Local or regional outreach. It's very common. If you're a concierge in the wine country for a hotel, if you're a doorman or valet parker for a restaurant, if you work in a restaurant, wineries will put on special events simply to get you to their winery to feel good about it, so that it may be at breakfast, at lunch, or at dinner. It might be while somebody's pulling your car up. Hey, we're heading out. Do you have any favorite places you'd like to go? And you want to be top of mind with the locals to say, oh yeah, I love this winery. They give us, every year they do a special event, and we get this great lunch or dinner or picnic, or we taste all their wines and so forth. When you're in the hotel, you'll see the rack cards with brochures and, you know, come to our winery. So, and this is general brochures also, people that can take away, you know, materials about that kind of stuff. And then, you know, what are you going to put into your social media campaigns? And not only with the usual suspects in Twitter Facebook ads and those kind of things. But also there are different social media companies that you can hire. So how much are you going to budget for that, and what's going to be your annual spend for social media? Then there's all sorts of outside services. You're going to have insurance. You're going to pay for shipping of things that are not covered in your wine club shipments. Those would be separate, but those have to be covered. Do you have anybody coming in for sales training, for wine education to train you and your staff and that kind of stuff? And then the basics: laundry, drinking water, first aid services, bank charges, big deal, because they can be pretty significant. Do you have security, either systems with cameras or a live body, a night watchman, those kind of things? Pest control, waste disposal. You gotta take out the trash. And then there's all sorts of licenses and permits, your legal fees, your office supplies, recruiting and training, postage, etc. Okay. So this is a very thorough pro forma of what goes in, and then you're going to have your payroll. A tasting room manager, maybe even an assistant manager, admin, or office person. Are you going to have salaried wine educators or salaried culinary people or anything else that you might want to put in there? And then you're also going to have hourly employees, and so you can set that up. And including, if you do special events or during peak times of the season, you might also be using on-call people, so that if there are certain weekends or whatever, you might want to add people, but not fully to your payroll. So you can do that. Janitorial, groundskeeping, landscaping. You've got to pay payroll taxes, and then one of the other things that kind of fits in here, and these are bonuses and incentives. In the tasting room, there's very frequently very incentives, even for just a couple hours. And it kind of goes like this: the tasting room manager will run a register receipt or something on the terminal for the point of sale where things are rung up, where you take the credit card and the money and all that. And they'll say, okay, our sales are at $1,000. If we can hit $2,000 by 2 o'clock today, everybody gets a bonus, an extra $25 or $50 or a bottle of wine or whatever. So these are daily tasting room sales incentives that are increasingly part of doing business. And then the other thing is any incentives that you offer for wine club signups. And these are usually cash incentives too. So if at the end of the day you've signed up 3 people for the wine club, you get an extra $75 if it's $25 per sign up. This is something also that has to be done very, very carefully, because there's so much pressure on people and incentives to, oh, if you signed up for our wine club, it's tracking is one of the things that most people find off-putting about visiting certain wineries. So you got to be really, really careful, because the last thing you want is every employee that somebody runs into, they're on the tour, oh, let me sign you up for the wine club. No, I don't want to join your freaking wine club. And then they go into the tasting room and the guy would oh, let me sign you up for the wine club. No, I don't want to sign up for the wine club. And then they're checking out, oh, did you sign up for our wine club? Would you freaking leave me alone? So this is actually showing up as a very significant negative on Yelp and on other rating sites. Okay? And finally, you get into your P&L and figure out, you know, where's your profit and loss coming from, and how that breaks out. Okay, so that is that. And again, it's very similar if you're running a retail store even a bar to some extent, particularly a wine bar, and how that works. Okay. All righty then. So, and so here's all these incentives and discounts and promotions, and these can eat you alive. I showed the card for the $100 off from the wine club. Just saw another one. 15 bottles of wine for $69.95 from the wine club. That ends up pretty cheap. So what are you giving away? And again, if you're doing the events and stuff, remember that you can use those as a perk for your wine club members. You know, oh, we've got this band or this event happening, and you can the wine club member and can bring a guest because you want them to bring somebody to sign up and to build your list. So lots can be spent there. All right. In terms of direct to consumer shipments, the 2017 versus 2016, I don't have the 2018 full numbers yet, but things are starting to get a little bit saturated, if you will. And so wine club shipments and internet site purchases, keep in mind that I believe the number still remains about 90% of wines that are purchased for to be opened the day that they're purchased, all right? So convenience and thinking ahead is not something that most wine consumers do. The more the higher end buyers and people more familiar with you know advantages of internet, people with cellars are much more likely to buy direct than most consumers are. Okay, so in retail stores, and this is where things are kind of crossing over a bit. Where it's legal, go into some stores and do where you can do something like a Total Wines and More or a BevMo or something like that. Okay, so a large high volume wine, beer, and liquor store. And then see if you can find a small specialist and go in and see what they're doing. Sort of a private retailer, and go into Costco and see what they're doing. But what you're going to find, yeah, they've got their wine sales. They're definitely selling merchandise. They may just have a couple little food things. They might have a really, really large section of all sorts of food items, and including sometimes perishables. The retail stores are doing events. Come to our Thursday night, wine education event, or they might have off-site events that they have that are done at a hotel or a park or something like that. More and more stores have their own wine bar and tasting right in the store, so that they can have the dual license. They have their on-premise, so that they can do tastings in the store and you can consume wine on the premises, plus their off-premise license for the normal bottle and case sales. They'll be offering wine education. Home delivery is legal in a lot of areas, and in special areas like Washington, D.C. and New York. We're making a special trip to a wine store. It's really prohibitive because you burn up so much time trying to find parking and make your purchase and get back to your car or your home or whatever. So there are a number of states where it's legal to actually do home deliveries. This is going to be something also. Remember, we had talked about Whole Foods being purchased by Amazon, And that means Amazon had become an internet reseller, but when they purchased Whole Foods, there was a legal issue that they couldn't be an online retailer and hold liquor licenses in the various states and conduct business. So they shut down, probably temporarily, the Amazon wine sales, and they might be replacing it with home delivery in certain markets, because now they've got, a couple hundred bricks and mortar stores and liquor licenses, and where legal, it could become very easy that order your wine on Amazon.com and pick it up at your local Whole Foods store, or order it from your local Whole Foods store, and then they'll take care of the shipping or delivery to your home. Okay? And that would be the internet purchase deliveries by a retail store. And then wine stores have inventory. They've got lots of product. And so, again, where it's legal, they can start a wine club and offer a much greater selection than a winery or even a group of wineries could possibly achieve. And so the number one reason people stop participating in a wine club is because there's not enough diversity. They start getting wines that they really don't like. They love big reds, and now they're getting rosé and Sauvignon Blanc, or vice versa. They love rosé and Sauvignon Blanc, but they're getting red wines and whatever. So a lot of advantages to a retail store to have a wine club also, and do those regular deliveries. And they've got, hundreds, if not thousands, of wines to offer in the wine club. So again, here's the full list, and I want to share with you then one of my favorite case studies, and it's Kiepersol Winery in Tyler, Texas. And could you imagine if you were a business person speculating about opening a winery, and maybe you're an investor or you've been brought in to consult, and somebody says, well, we've got 3,000 acres and we want to leave a legacy for our children, and we wanted to do something different with our property here in Texas. And we're in a dry county. And for any of you that don't know what that means, so in the US we have states that are divided into then counties, and then you have the cities and the counties. So a dry county is one in which there's a prohibition still lingering, where it's illegal to sell alcoholic beverages. And how much business sense would that make to open a winery in a place where alcohol sales are illegal? Well, smart people look for opportunities in the strangest places. And the founder of Kiepersol, Pierre DeWet, passed away a couple of years ago. Loved the man, loved the family. I've consulted for these people on their production and so forth. But darned if Pierre didn't have a vision that he could take 3,000 acres east of Dallas, about 2.5 hours east of Dallas, that was just Texas pasture land, and very, very low value. And his daughter, Marnelle Durrett, wanted to become a winemaker, and she went to enology school. Pierre started working with people and said, well, what would happen if we opened a winery? And it turned out they could open a winery in a dry county and have a license to have a tasting room and to sell retail from the tasting room. It's the only place in the county. And then they also found that if they had the winery and had the licensing, they could open up 2 remote tasting rooms. So there are 2 places in downtown Tyler, Texas, where you can buy a drink, and those are the Kiepersol tasting rooms. Well, don't you know that if you've got a winery and you open a restaurant with a winery, you can actually have a full bar. And so you can go to the restaurant at Kiepersol Winery and have martinis and beer and wine with your dinner, and it's the only restaurant in all of the county where you can do that. Well, dang, let's open a distillery. We love rum and gin and bourbon and all that kind of stuff. So they opened a distillery. They've got accommodations, and it's sort of bed and breakfast and beautiful lodging in the vineyards in the wine country of Tyler, Texas. They've got a recording studio because they opened up the party barn, which accommodates over 1,000 people. And if you want to get married or have a wedding or a big party or whatever, and have any kind of drinks, there's only one place you can do that. That's the party barn at Kiepersol. And so then they started doing the events and bringing in big names, because this is a large venue. And so they even have the studio, which is a state-of-the-art, amazing recording studio, so that when the artists come in, they can actually do special recordings and stuff that they can sell and promote and so on and so forth. Over here, you can buy real estate. So what was fairly worthless real estate property, as you know, it was cow pasture, is now luxurious vineyard home sites. That's just great. I really, really recommend everybody go to the Kiepersol website and see what the heck they're doing. And if you get a chance to travel to Indiana or to Missouri or Virginia, certainly New York, even Florida, keep an eye out and put aside, you know, this kind of attitude for a bit and see what these people are doing as businesses. And it's pretty cool. Okay. So marketing a tasting room, marketing your winery, these are all very compatible and synergistic businesses as well, because when you have that musical event or that farmer's market or whatever it does, you're generating more traffic, more awareness. Oh, hey, let's make a special trip. Let's plan to do this weekend. You've got to market it. You've got to do what's necessary to generate that. And whether it's just the individuals or, you know, families, individual cars that are going through a region, but you can start to appeal to different groups and so on and so forth. That when you're marketing your store, or your tasting room, you really have to convert the shoppers into buyers, and not only the wine sales, but the merchandise, having things that are attractive. There are a lot of tasting rooms that I go into, and they just have hideous merchandise. I guess some people find them attractive, but also you want to convert people into wine club members, and if you do have a wine mailing list or maybe a blog or a Facebook page, those kind of things. Once you've gotten to that point, you really have to retain the customers. Customers are gold. As I mentioned before, the average annual fall off rate, if I've got 100 members of my wine club today, in 1 year, the average will mean there's only 60 at the end of the year. So I could add 40 new wine club members and I'm only breaking even. I'm not growing. So keeping and keeping those wine club members active is just a really important thing. And keeping those communications, the email blasts and so forth. And then the at-home repeat sales is when somebody leaves with the experience and they've been to the tasting or the event and so forth. You want them to go home and be able to purchase your wines at retail. So I'm having dinner tonight. Oh gosh, I wonder if they have this wine. Let's see if we can get a bottle for tonight. So these are the at-home repeat sales. So after somebody's gone, maybe they're only getting their wine club shipment twice a year or even monthly, but they've already drunk it. You want them to still buy your property. And so that's where the visitor experiences and special things really come in handy to keep that alive. So this is what I was referring to earlier when we were looking at the three types of tastings. You've got the seated formal tasting, if you're just standing at the tasting bar, a seated tasting, but people are just being kind of served their flights, or a seated casual group with kind of group seatings. You can see that the highest percentage of conversion was for the formal seated tasting. And the question you really need to ask is, how much did that cost me? Because if you're doing that seated tutored tasting, yes, you're going to get higher conversion, but how much does it cost to do that? To do the setup, the space limitations, the additional, do you have a salaried or an hourly wine educator or somebody to lead that tasting? Okay, so you're just constantly looking at the pluses and minuses of all that. Okay, all right. So as we're going through, we're going to start transitioning Wednesday. We're going to get into the final 2 weeks, and you will be working, and I'll explain it fully, your final projects, a winery of your choice, and it could be a blending project, or it could be the full cost of goods workup, and you're going to combine that with your WineBizSim sales plan, and what you should consider in your final project. I want information about the wine and the cost of goods and production and what you're doing there. And then also discussion of the mission, vision, and goals. I'm going to go over this Wednesday in much more detail. And then some of the key things about how you're going to manage. Are you going to grow your own grapes or purchase them? Are you going to do the paperwork? Or are you going to hire an admin? Or are you going to outsource that to a company that provides these service? These kind of things. So this is really to kind of bring everything together in the business from the beginning to the end in understanding it from a business context. Okay, so we'll begin to go over that in detail, and then we'll be as we've been doing, looking at a SWOT analysis of the business and all of these decisions. So for example, if you're going to sell direct to the consumers, what are you good at? What are you not good at? What kind of opportunities are out there, and what kind of threats? So if we were to talk about the wine clubs and this and that, you're going to have the ability to market and to get the word out there. You might not be really great in your interpersonal skills, so you do have to compensate for that, or so forth. And you might have an opportunity that direct-to-consumer sales are still rising, they're still strong, but the threat is that more and more retail stores, restaurants, radio stations are starting to open their own wine clubs. So the threat of competition is always there. And then looking for what kind of resources are needed, what's the cost of doing business, what's the margin, and then what's your potential volume. Because if you're doing a tasting room, you're limited by your location, the amount of traffic, and the amount of sales you can generate. So if you have a fairly large production, you better have then other higher volume sales channel opportunities. Could be direct account, it could be through the 3-tier system, it could be through your wine club. So you've got to look at how all that works together, okay? All right, so next week, actually next week's going to be a little tough for scheduling a call, the end of this week, and then next Monday will be good. I'm leaving for China the first week of March, and that's going to present all sorts of challenges, but we'll work that out because you'll be working on your final projects mostly, and we'll get everything set up that needs to be, okay? And then very quickly, I wanted to address a couple questions that had come up. And regarding class tonight, let me close out some of these windows here, excuse me. And Paulina was asking, what does the business of selling shiners and bulk wine look like, and assuming taste and flavor varies? So the business of selling shiners is really becoming a detective. You've got to constantly be monitoring what wines are available unlabeled. So remember, the shiners are unlabeled bottles. This is a half bottle, but it's shiny. That's why they call them shiners. But it'll have a cork and a capsule or a screw cap and be ready to go. All you need to do is add the label. The hard part of the shiner business is maintaining a continuity of product and supply of product, because a lot of times the shiners are sort of a one-off offering. So it's a highly specialized but can be highly lucrative business opportunity. And then bulk wine, you are constantly looking for what kind of inventories. And again, there's thousands and thousands of wines in bulk available. And so you actually then are doing samples and blending and putting together wines so you can offer much more continuity of quality and style, but you've got to be a master at blending wine. And it really, really is kind of a cool aspect of business. And I go to Cameron Hughes, Cameron, Cameron Hughes, Hugs, and look at their model. They specialize in bulk and shiner and also production wines and so forth, okay? So it's and again, in doing a SWOT analysis, there's a lot of challenges in that part of the business. And then the other question is, how much does a well-known winemaker mean on a label? And that depends on the market for which the wine is intended. If you've got a wine that's going to the Robert Parker, the Wine Spectator crowd, having a Heidi Barrett or an Aaron Pott or one of the top names, Helen Turley, they are all consulting winemakers, and they charge pretty astronomical fees, but the value of their name is huge. And so you've got to work that into your budget, and then again, you're weighing what's the advantage of having that name on there. What does that promise in terms of the quality of the wine and their expertise? And then what's also then the marketing value, so that can you charge significantly more to make up for that differential of payment? Paulina, we can talk about this a little bit more in detail too if you need, let me know. And then there was also some fun stuff from Denver in Macau. I think he gets our longest commute award for this class. He's in Macau off the coast of China. And one of the questions here I thought was interesting. You know, all the states, as you've seen, have all different taxes. So if you're creating a national brand and you're trying to have an established price, you know, that it sells for $24.99 or whatever, and you want that to be consistent state by state, it could be that you've got a different FOB price from the winery to your distributors in different states to make up for that difference. The other thing is you might be able to have the distributor eat part of that also. Distributors in the states with higher taxes sometimes will be a little bit more sympathetic, but that might compromise your ability to have them really be behind your product if you're asking them to make less money and so forth. And then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to set up, well, probably a week from tonight, I'm going to do a special presentation for the MW students and WSET students and whatever about preparing for examination and that kind of stuff. So we'll get to that. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, hope you enjoyed this evening. Hope your class is going well. And if it's not, let me know. If you don't let me know, not a lot I can do about it. And I'll let you know what my China schedule is coming up, and off we go. Thank you very much. Talk to you all soon.